And hello, everybody. Lovely to see you all.
Hello.
Hi, Jade. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you, Wendy?
I'm fine, thank you, Jade. Lovely to see the people that have arrived already. Good afternoon to those of you that have now joined us. My name is Wendy Delf, and I am the UK lead for Visible Learning. I work with a fantastic team, both at Osiris, Jade being one of the administrators that supports our team, and also the trainers that work in schools as well. We do have chat function facility, so please do write in the chat box who you are, where you're from, and whether you've done visible learning before or whether this is something that you're interested in. This afternoon, I'm actually going to link the work of Professor John Hattie and his webinar that he did with Stephen a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to talk about the implementation of that visible learning programme. So before I do that, I'm just going to introduce Jade to you, Jade Driver, and she's going to tell you a little bit about her role. Thank you, Jade.
Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all this afternoon. My name's Jade. I've recently come on board with Osiris Educational in the marketing department. I'm really excited this afternoon to learn more about how to implement visible learning.
Well, thank you very much, Jade, and we'll be seeing you again shortly.
No worries. See you in a bit.
Thanks, Jade. Okay, I'm going to tell you today a little bit about that visible learning process that Professor Hattie talked about with Stephen a couple of weeks ago. We talked about the 5 tenets of visible learning, and those tenets were on the left, the learning first and centre, the importance of teacher development, that leadership at all levels, how we make this process sustainable, and how we ultimately get better outcomes for our learners. And today what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through that by the 5 things that are on the right-hand side of the slide. So we're looking there at the donut, the mind frames, the die model and getting to gold, the impact cycles, and what impact looks like for our learners. So my first slide is about the visible learning donut. And for me, this is the whole picture of what visible learning is all about. It's about the interconnectivity of these elements. So what we have at the front and the center is the visible learner. So focusing on our learners, focusing on our pupils and our students. We then look at the skill, the will and the thrill. And this is the work of Hattie and Donahue. And they looked at the prior learning of pupils, understanding that prior learning. If we can ascertain this, we can teach accordingly. The skill and the thrill are about the motivation and the ability. So if we know how pupils are motivated and we know to what extent they're going to have that ability for that motivation, then we're more likely to get it exactly right for them. So those 3 things together, prior learning, ability and motivation, that interconnectivity of those things linked to the rest of the donut. So if I go to the top left-hand corner of the donut and look at the learner dispositions, these are the dispositions, the characteristics of learning. And what we want our pupils to be able to do is to understand what it is to be a learner and have a language to talk about that. We then also look at the learner dispositions from then into the learner processes. So those learner processes are about metacognitivity. So we're looking there at metacognitive strategies that we can use with our pupils. So metacognition can be used at surface level and deep level. And if we know where our learners are in terms of their ability and their motivation, we can use the right metacognitive strategies at the right time for each learner. So those dispositions and those learner processes go hand in hand. What am I as a learner, and how do I learn strategies that I can use during my learning through the context of my learning? And then we also need to think about assessment capability. So we call our learners assessment capable visible learners. And this is about the process of learning and the progression that learners make. So that ability to be able to think about what I'm learning, how am I doing, and where to next? So do our learners have that clarity around progress? So this is where we talk about teacher clarity, we talk about learning intentions and success criteria. And then we've got feedback. And here we're talking about effective feedback because this influence is one of the most variable. So what we want our learners to be able to do is to seek feedback, to have that self-regulation, to receive feedback, to be able to give feedback, and to be able to act upon feedback. Surrounding that, we've got the visible teaching and leading, and this is where the mind frames for teachers form part of that impact. So it's about having a shared language around teaching and pedagogy, and it's about the way that we think about our teaching and the way we think about the impact on our pupils' learning. And then surrounding that again, we've got this shared language. So what does that language of learning look like for our pupils, for our teachers, for our leaders, and then for the wider school community, so our governors and our parents? This isn't a one-dimensional diagram. This is an interconnected three-dimensional diagram, and we need to be able to understand it, to interpret it, and to use it to enable us to move our pupils forwards. So in terms of the programme, we have a kind of sandwich, for want of a better word, to talk about the training. And we have at the top of that sandwich the 10 mind frames, so the way that we think about our teaching and our pupils' learning. And that comes from the work of Hattie and Zira, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. We also have, as a foundation, the visible learning research that Professor Hattie has had in place now for over 30 years. And then we have these 5 threads of visible learning. The visible learner, which comes through the donut, know thy impact, so knowing how impactful our teaching is. Thinking about visible teaching and leading, so having those conversations about what good practice looks like. Being able to understand effective feedback rather than just feedback, so what are the tenets of feedback? And then linking this all into the visible learning school. So these are your systems and your processes, your curricula. How do they all enact those other 4 strands? We then need to think about the research and how we can use that research to support us. Now, if you've been following John Hattie for a number of years, his first book, I call it the White Book, the 2009 book, had the visible learning influences in rank order. And Professor Hattie has moved away from that now, because the problem we were having was schools were taking the top 10 and saying, let's just do those and see how important those can be. What we want instead is that the research becomes a point for discussion. Why is it that feedback in terms of effect size has actually gone down recently? Well, we need to be looking at the influence of feedback and thinking about why it is both effective and when it can be ineffective and when the effect size can go down. We also need to look at some of those effect sizes way down that used to be in the rank order. For example, mobility. We know that highly mobile pupils actually regress in their learning. So we need to be looking at the effect sizes across all of these. So what we can do now is we can look at Professor Hattie's work through visible learning metax.com. So this is a live platform where the data is continually updated, and it means that you can go on there and use this as a point of discussion rather than taking those top 10. We also need to think about those mind frames, part of that sandwich. There are 10 mind frames, and John actually wrote about those in the book that's on the left of the screen, and we've actually brought them down into 3 key areas. So we're looking at mind frames for impact. One of the key ones is I am an evaluator. So do we sit back as teachers and think about our resources, our time and our energy? What impact is actually that having on our student learning? We think about assessment and thinking about what is that telling us about our practice and our students' next steps. It's about that collaboration so that we can collaborate to understand the impact that we're having. And then we've got the learning focus. So this is where we're helping students to understand what feedback does, so how it can be helpful to them so that they can both seek it, receive it, and act upon it and give feedback themselves. Crucially, it's about dialogue. So we want to be able to help teachers to find opportunities to use dialogue rather than monologue. Because if learning is invisible, how do we make it visible? And we make it visible through more opportunities for dialogue. We also, in the mind frames, want to be able to look at specific and explicit ways of informing students what success looks like. So that's where we really sort of delve into those success criteria. We also want to build that relational trust. So having a place where pupils feel safe, where they can take risks, and where error making is part of that learning process. And having a language to be able to talk about all of those things. And finally, we've got that challenge and that change. So along with I am an evaluator, for me, I am a change agent is one of the crucial mind frames. How collectively do we ensure that we believe all of our students can improve? They can all make at least a year's worth of progress. And the final mind frame is I strive for challenge and not merely doing your best. Professor Hattie said the worst thing that we can actually say to our students is do their best. What we need to do instead is take them on a journey and not ask them where that best will be, but actually keep on going, finding that next step. So just going back to the slides then, how do we implement this in our schools through the Visible Learning Programme? So the Visible Learning Programme takes around 2 to 3 years. So it is a CPD or professional development programme that is going to be something you invest in for some time. It works at 3 levels. So we have the senior leadership level. And what we do is we support the senior leadership with evidence gathering tools and planning tools to help them to gather the evidence about how they're having an impact at the moment, where the gaps are, and how we can support that improvement plan over the next 3 years. The second level is working with impact coaches. And these are crucial because these are a group of teachers. They're going to be both working with the senior leadership team and also the teachers. And we give them additional support as well during the programme to help them to understand that role. And then we've got the teachers themselves. We've got over 75 hours of training as part of the programme. So this is where collectively we work together to understand how learners learn, how teachers think about that learning, and the impact that we have. And throughout all of those 2.5, 3 years that we're with you, it is about the diagnosis. Where are you? How do you know that you're there? What evidence have you got? And what evaluation are you doing so that we can see the progress that we're making together? That implementation can come in various formats. So again, you may have come across John Hattie's DIE model. His DIE model is used within the training. We talk about D for diagnosis. So this is where we use pupil data, pupil voice, observations, both formal and informal, book looks, discussions with each other to think about that. Where are we now? How do we know that we're there? Where is the evidence? We then move on to the interventions. So from that diagnosis, what do we need to do? What are the gaps we need to fill and how are we going to fill them? What are we going to use to fill those gaps? The second I is about implementation. This is the intensity of that intervention or the length of that intervention so that we know that we're doing this for the right amount of time in the right way. And then we've got the evaluation. And we can use a protocol like here's what, so what, now what. So doing that evaluation, here's what we found. Then the so what. So what are we going to do with that information? And the now what, which brings us back to the diagnosis. John has also written with Aaron Hamilton a series called Getting to Gold, which reflects the DIE model. So again, we've got the G for gold hunting. So this is what do we need to improve? What are we going to mine? What are we going to find? The opportunity sift, the O, is about an agreement mechanism. What are we going to agree to do, having diagnosed what we found? And then we've got the lift off, which is the implementation. So when we know what we've got, how are we going to do something that's going to improve and change the status quo? And then we've got 2 Ds. We've got a double back, where we're going to evaluate what we've done, and a double up, where we're going to scale up. And this is really where your impact coaches come in as well, because we can go through this process in a very small way, maybe in a classroom or a set of classrooms. But how do we scale this up across the school? How do we scale this up across a mat? And what about the fidelity of scaling that up? And that's part of the implementation that we have. We also implement at leadership at all levels. So that's about developing a shared language. That's about having collective efficacy. So the work of Jenny Donahue comes into play here, so that we know we can all actually make a difference. It's also led by leadership teams, it's supported by your impact coaches, and it's driven by teachers. So both at a top down and a bottom up and a middle up, that's where we're going to get that implementation to work. Throughout, the common theme is diagnosis, making sure we know why we're doing what we're doing, and dialogue, making sure we continue to talk about that. We do that process in an iterative way. So both senior leaders and teachers use impact cycles. So for the senior leadership team, this is a strategic cycle. We present you with some tools and some evidence collection tools that you can use, and a plan that will help you to deliver your school impact cycle. For teachers, we provide again the tools and the diagnosis tools that you can use so that we can have impact cycles running in classrooms as well. What do we know about the way that we're working in our classrooms, and how can we use that information to improve outcomes for our learners? And again, this is where those impact coaches come in, because they actually work between both the leadership team and the teachers. They support the leadership team with the school impact cycle. They support teachers with their classroom impact cycle. So the impact coaches, they get additional training. We provide an extra 3 days over the 3 years. And this additional model of coaching uses the work of Jim Knight, so his instructional model of coaching, and also drawing on people like Viviane Robinson, where we look at things like the ladder of inference and open to learning conversations. What do we want at the end of 3 years? I want to go back to that donut. The middle of that donut was a visible learner. What we're looking for is the progress that all our pupils can make. One of the key tenets of visible learning is to say that every child, regardless of starting point, can make at least a year's worth of progress. So if we're going to think about our focus on progress, what do we need to ensure that our pupils and our teachers and our leaders have in their toolkit? We need strategies. So teachers need strategies in terms of shared learner dispositions, understanding metacognitive strategies. Our pupils need that as well. They need a shared language around the strategies they're going to use to understand what it is to be a learner, but also metacognitive strategies to understand how to engage in learning during that process. We need to have a shared understanding about progression, and that's going to come from our learning intentions and our success criteria. It's about being able to have a strong sense of belonging, a mutual respect for each other. And I know when I've talked to teachers over the last 10 months, that's had been a huge thing that we've been working on, and something to really celebrate as a success in these really difficult times. It's also about motivation. And motivation is going to come when pupils have an investment in their learning. So pupils who see the point in their learning are more likely to make progress. So that's also going to be about those mind frames. How do we help our pupils to have that motivation so that step by step, they can see the progress they're making on a lesson by lesson, day by day, week by week, term by term, year by year progress. So it's helping our pupils to move from co-regulation to self-regulation, from not always having to rely on the teachers, but being able to rely on themselves, to be able to have that feedback model where they can feed back to themselves about how well they're doing, to understand the progress they're making, and making this invisible learning visible to themselves and the teachers to make it visible to them as well. So it is about that donut. That donut is a crucial part of that visible learning program. It's about the dispositions, it's about the metacognition, it's about the shared language, the shared understanding of what progress means, and particularly what does a year's worth of progress look like for your pupils in your context. It's about effective feedback, and it's about the mind frames. One of the things I know that schools have been asking is, in this unprecedented time, what do we mean about how we're going to present this training? Well, yeah, we do have face-to-face training, and this picture that I took with a colleague of mine, Martin Morgan, it was about a year and a half ago now. It looks quite alien to us at the moment, but that face-to-face training will come back and we will be using it. However, at the moment, we can also offer some of that face-to-face training as virtual. So we're working particularly on platforms like Zoom, where we can offer that face-to-face materials, particularly for our SLT, which are usually smaller numbers, and our impact coaches. Those materials can be delivered in a virtual way and very successfully at the moment. We've also got some new online modules. And again, if you wanted to find out more about those, then we book an appointment through Katie or Jade. And I certainly wouldn't have any problem being able to talk you through those. They last over a 6 to 8 week period. We are there with you throughout that period as well. And it's like a distance learning program. So it offers that opportunity for flexibility. It doesn't need an inset day. And it gives you that opportunity to think about how can I deliver professional development in a way that's going to help my teachers. And I think one thing that we've all learned at the moment is how to deliver and how to use online resources more effectively. So that will be another new, fresh way, and we can blend this in the future as well. So we are getting to the point now with new contracts where we're doing some of our work virtually. We hope to deliver some face-to-face, but we're also looking at online modules as well. And finally, I just want to mention the World Education Summit, because this is an amazing event over 4 days. I'm going to be there with 3 of my schools. One of the schools are going to be talking about coaching and how they've been using impact coaches. I'm also going to be talking to a school about how they've used visible learning for their curricular development, particularly within reading. And I'm also going to be talking with one of the schools about how they've created strategic sustainability and fidelity, having left the visible learning program now for well over 18 months, but are still using the tools, the evidence tools, the impact cycles to make sure we've got those outcomes. So before we finish, Jade, I'm just going to come back to you because I know we're going to finish on that video. I know you've been keeping an eye on the chat box. Is there anything there that any questions that anybody has got?
I can just see from quite a few people, they wanted to know how the training and the visible learning is relevant in the remote learning situation. But you touched on that just on the last bit there. But if there are any more questions, anything more that you want to know about visible learning and how you can implement it within your school, book an appointment with Katie, and she'll happily go through that all with you in the appointment.
Absolutely, that's great. Well, thank you, and thank you all for being here. And we just want to finish with this lovely trailer because hopefully it gives you a flavour of the World Education Summit if you haven't yet had a chance to have a look.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.